Welcome to Author Speak. I'm Linda Mall, founder of Accountability by Design and Readers of the Pack, a community for leaders who are readers. And I'm host of our conversation today. My co-host, Laura Haynes, is actually on holidays this week. And so I am solo as we do this journey. And our guest today is Karin Hurt, author of Powerful Phrases for Dealing with Conflict. And so I will be asking questions of Karin over the next half hour, and we'll have 50 minutes at the end for any of our guests to ask their questions for the last 50 minutes of the call. So a warm welcome to all of you who have joined us on the call this morning. You can know that the author's information, all of the PowerPoint slides will be sent to you after this call so that you'll have all of the contact information. We invite you at that time to purchase the book if you haven't already, and also visit their website, which will be on the PowerPoint for you to access. So I am thrilled to be in conversation with Karin. She's the CEO and founder of Let's Grow Leaders, named Incorporation Inc.'s top 100 leadership speaker. Quite an award as a facilitator and keynote speaker. I know the work that goes into that. And she is co-author of the book that we're um, uh, highlighting this morning, which is Powerful Phrases for Dealing with Conflict, but it's not her only book. And so we'll let Karin speak to that as we close this series today. So Karin, welcome. Great to have you here. I've been listening to your videos over the last few weeks. I've read the book, really enjoyed it. Actually pulled some questions out for a conversation
Great.
with my 14-year-old
Oh,
grandson yesterday. So trialed them and they worked. But I'm curious, what was your primary goal in writing this book? Particularly.
first of all, thank you so much for having me. As we were working with clients really all over the world, since the pandemic, we were noticing that
Mhm.
we were thinking there is more conflict. It feels like there's more conflict, and
Yeah.
it's a different kind of conflict. It's more complex, what we call a conflict cocktail. So we wanted to study that to see, is that true? Was that just our experience, or is there more conflict now? So we did the World Workplace Conflict and Collaboration Survey
Mhm.
to really understand, was conflict increasing? And yes, it was. And what was happening and what were the dynamics and sources of that conflict? Because we're all about really practical tools and techniques. And so what we really wanted to understand is the nature of the conflict so that we could give people, empower people with better words, better approaches to handle these situations, because so often people will be coaching or doing a leadership development program. People like, can you just give me the words to use? And so we thought, okay, well, maybe we can. Let's think about what are these scenarios. We'll give you some words.
Yeah, and you did. I appreciated some of those words already. So you speak of four dimensions of constructive conflicts specifically, which was very interesting for me. Is there one dimension? First, I guess first of all, highlight the four, but the other question is there one dimension you feel is more important than the others, and why?
Oh,
Oh,
tricky. So the four dimensions are connection. Are we connected as human beings? Clarity. Do we have a shared understanding of success? Curiosity. Are we genuinely interested in one another's perspectives and what's possible? And commitment. Do we have a shared agreement moving forward? Now, if I were on a debate team and you said, okay, argue for this dimension, I could make a solid debate for any of these. But I think if I had to pick one, well, I mean, certainly connection, right? Because if you don't
mhm.
have trust and connection,
Yeah.
people are not going to give you the benefit of the doubt. And it happens before you have anything. So I'd have to say connection, but I would also make a strong argument for clarity. Because
Ah,
what we find is so many conflicts come from an expectation violation of some sort or another, right?
mhm.
our home conflicts. I expected you to empty the dishwasher before you went off to school today,
Mhm.
and you didn't. And so now we have a conflict, right? It's not a big conflict, but there is an expectation violation.
Yeah.
And it happens all the time, especially in this new world of work, remote and hybrid teams. I expected you to have your camera on in our one-on-one. You thought this is a good time. We have a good relationship. I'm so tired. I have Zoom fatigue. I'm not going to put it on. Well, if we don't have a shared expectation, we can have conflict over something as simple as that because we're interpreting, well, what does that mean and why? And so that if you can just get better clarity about expectations, you can clear up many of those conflicts before they even start.
Yeah, and I think they pile on too. So once you've had one conflict in the morning and then another later on in the day and a later, it escalates, right? And it
Yes.
feels bigger than it really is sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think we did a survey in our own company last fall, I think it was, and clarity came to the top of the list then. But agree with you, without connection, without relationship, you have nothing, right?
Yeah.
Just nothing. So you also suggested conflict is like oil and water, and both elements can help or harm.
Yeah.
And so I was particularly curious about the help part, but can help or harm? Can you speak to that?
Yeah.
And I
Conflict in
think,
itself is not inherently bad. Right? On the other side of a productive conflict conversation is creativity, innovation, new ways of thinking, problem solving, exploration, willing to take new risks. And when I think about it, my husband is my co-author and also business partner. So we were working together all the time. And I will tell you that we have conflict every single day. And it is not most of the time bad conflict. I mean, sometimes it is, but most of the time it is because our brains work completely differently. And I am a very big picture thinker, fast moving, always, how can we do this? Well, I know we said we are going to go here, but what if we go there? And he is an operator, right? He is very methodical and says, hey, let's get this right. Have we considered? Well, that's inherently going to be conflict. And it is that marriage, right, of the when you can be going big and fast, but also be deliberate and controlled. That's where we can run a really great business. And if I only had, and trust me, we have employees like this, and if I only have those guys on my side, that's when we can overextend, get into trouble, not think all the things through. And so that conflict is powerful. But if you don't know how to handle conflict, and it was interesting because when David and I were first started working together and started merging our businesses together, we had a lot of unproductive conflict because we were both used to running the business, our
Mhm,
own businesses
mhm,
before, and we were both had our ways of doing things. And so we had to learn how to manage that well and whose role was what and who owns which decisions. And so that's how you get to the better conflict. So you want to be able to have a disagreement. That's all conflict is. I think this, you think that, but it's how you handle it, whether it's destructive and hurts the relationship, or it actually helps the relationships and helps your outcomes.
that constructive or destructive
Yeah.
in every situation, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the other statements you made in the book was sometimes you just have to put the fish on the table and talk about what stinks. And I thought there are so many times in my life where if I'd done that, we would have been able to deal with the issue and been better for all, right? So I'd love for you to speak to that because that was my response when I
Yeah.
read it.
We loved that. So we were doing work in Switzerland with Nestle, and we were doing some really in-depth culture change work. And as they were talking about how they were managing through conflict as an executive team, and that apparently is a European phrase. Put the fish on the
Oh,
table, and we're like, oh, that is fantastic. Put the fish on the table. We call that ditching the diaper genie. Also, is another way to talk about it. And David and I have been carrying a diaper genie around on airplanes for the last 12 years because what we found is that a lot of times in companies and organizations, people are afraid to talk about what stinks. So
Mhm.
they take the bad news and they put it in the genie and they wrap it up and they disguise it. And then it goes up and people are looking at it and like, well, there's nothing wrong here. I don't see any bad news. Right. And so,
Mhm.
that's the same kind of thing. Like, how can we have the maturity to talk about the difficult things, but in a productive way? And it's really about the how that makes the difference. Because if you just put the fish on the table and then scream at each other, nothing gets better either, right?
Mhm. So this was not a planned question, but is there one strategy or tip that you can give this group to actually start that conversation about
I mean, I
legacy?
think one of the most important ones, and this is one of our GOAT's greatest of all time powerful phrases, is I'm curious how this looks from your perspective. Because you're not even assuming you're in conflict because you're just like, well, I see it this way. So you start with them because that's polite.
Mhm.
I'm curious how this looks from your perspective. And then it's your turn. And this is how it looks looks from my perspective. And then the other a couple we have a whole chapter in how do you surface the conflict that people would rather
Mhm.
avoid.
Mhm.
But another thing is I'm experiencing this, or I've noticed that. How does this look from your perspective? And then but you can start gently, like, well, what's one thing we can agree on? So, well, what's one thing you agree on? If you can start with that, now you've narrowed the conversation. So maybe you aren't this far apart, you're only this far apart, and you can spend your time talking about that after you've established some common ground.
Mhm. Love it. Love it. So uh, you say silence is selfish, and I personally have used that term many times over the years. Can you expand on that from your perspective?
A lot of times people will be afraid to have the conversation. And if you do not have the conversation, then you're not giving the other person the benefit. You're already making up in your head all of the other things that you're expecting them to say. So that's one reason silence is selfish. So let me give you an example. I was one of the things I do with one of our larger clients is once a quarter I go and I set up office hours in their headquarters, and people can come in and have coaching conversations and work through issues. Well, during one of those days, it was before the book had actually come out, but I was still I was advertising it for pre-order
Oh,
at the bottom. We both were at the bottom of our email signatures. This guy goes like racing into my room, like, and he didn't have an appointment. He was just like, ah. And he says, Karin, I just got an email from David, my husband. He goes, and there's a book at the bottom of his signature, and it's called Powerful Phrases for Dealing with Workplace Conflict. Do you have a copy of that book in your purse? Because I need it right now. I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And I said, well, actually, it's not published yet, but I'm sure I can help you. What's going on? And he proceeded to say, for the last 3 months, I am just furious at this coworker, and I can't sleep, and my wife is getting sick of hearing all about it. And I just don't trust her. It's a problem. And I happen to know this person. And I said, you do know that she wants the exact same thing as you. And he goes, what do you mean? I said, what do you want out of this project? I said, she does too. Trust me. I just talked to her. She wants the exact same thing. Have you had the conversation?
mhm.
And he said, no. And so I gave him a couple of powerful phrases to show up connected, show up curious, what things look like from her perspective. He comes back 2 hours later. He goes, oh my gosh, I wasted 3 months of my life with so much anxiety. Do you know what? She does want the same thing as me. We just have a different way of getting there. We had a really productive conversation. So that's when silence is selfish because he never gave her an opportunity. But the other thing is, imagine you are having a conversation and there's a behavior that is really destructive, and you never tell someone about that. And you don't give them the chance to improve. An accountability conversation that you need to have. And a lot of times managers will say, well, I'm just really nice. I don't want to hold them accountable. It is
Mhm.
not nice to let somebody fail at their job. And I know you're all about accountability. Yeah, that is not nice. What is nice is to help them to do what they need to do to be extremely successful in their role. And sometimes that means having an accountability conversations to point out something and help them discover how they can improve. So if you never have that conversation, it's absolutely selfish because they're going along doing that destructive behavior and maybe even lose their job at some point because you haven't had the courage to help them.
I'm just curious now because you've touched on something that I think is happening in workplaces everywhere, every single day. I'm wondering if it's increased since COVID, because I feel that we've leaned towards um, empathy or that softness around employees rather and not focused on results over the last little while. And I hear leaders trying to get it back. We interviewed Nate Reger, Compassionate Accountability.
He's a good friend of
couple-
mine. Yeah.
yeah, and great author as
Yeah.
well, right?
Yeah.
And great content.
Yeah.
And he talks about that. But did your research also show that it's harder right now?
It's, so we went through an extraordinary time. And when you think about how we all managed through at that moment, we did completely, most of us really pivoted,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, take care of what you need to do. I know you've got toddlers crawling all over the place. I know you've got parents that you're worried about. Just do what you need to do the best you can and stay safe. And we all did that, right?
Mhm.
And that was necessary at that time. But what has happened in many organizations is that they are still working from home or working in hybrid teams, and they never took a step back to say, okay, now that we're out of this crisis, what
Mhm.
does it look like to have productive working from home? And so they've taken these policies and haven't gone back and made them as if they were to, if they had made a planned pivot to work from home, it would be
Mhm.
different. So an example we talk about in the book, and it's an extreme example, but it's a for real example. This company said you can work from anywhere. And so they started it during COVID. You can work from anywhere, no problem. And then they made this huge announcement. This is going to continue to be our policy. Just work from anywhere. Problem is not in the policy. The problem is in that the lack of expectations of what does that really mean. And
Mhm.
so there was this situation where this person was working from anywhere and went on LinkedIn and said, isn't this cool? My company has this work from anywhere policy, which means I can work from the petting zoo with my children. There's a picture of her holding a Zoom call on one hand, petting a pony on the other. Now, all the comments are from her coworkers
Mhm.
going, and she's isn't this interesting because you haven't returned my email in 3 days. You weren't at our meeting, right? Like, so all these expectation violations. And
Mhm.
so that, but I don't blame her. I blame lack of clarity of the policies, right? And so that's where it really comes back to is, yeah, we call it landing in the end of results and relationships,
Mhm.
right? And how do you do both? You want to stay connected as human beings. You want to, bring out the humanity, foster collaboration. But just saying you can do whatever you want because you may or may not have mental health challenges going on is not going to create for high performing teams, connected teams, it's going to actually create more conflict.
Yeah. And if we're not holding them accountable and we're challenged to do that, I think your book and the phrases that you have offered in that book can help people step into some of those conversations without the fear they hold, right? It
Yeah.
does not have to be aggressive or conflicting, or
Right.
it doesn't have to be.
Right.
We just need tools and strategies to start those
Yeah.
conversations, right? So, one of the many valuable chapters in this book was navigating conflict in a matrix organization, because I coach many leaders who are still working in matrix organizations, and it's never really easy. it always has some challenges. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so we work with a lot of matrix organizations too, and it was interesting because when we were preparing for this book, writing this book, we interviewed Ralph Kilman, who is
Mm.
really. I
Hmm.
asked him if I could call him this, so it's okay. He said I could call him the grandfather of conflict research, and because he really has been at it for
Yes.
a very long time in a
Yeah.
very deliberate way, and he really says most conflict is coming from an organization, some kind of organizational structure or systems. And yet we get people in a room and we say, you need to get along. And why can't you be a better team player when we have set them up for conflict because of the structure? So the very first thing I would say with working in a matrix organization is if you are in charge of how these policies and processes work,
Mm.
make sure that you are setting your teams up for success. But probably most of the people who are listening in right now are like, yeah, that's great, but I'm not in charge. So how do I do?
Mm.
And so, then it's in the book, we outline some different ways, but it's having the conversations of how you're going to do. How are we going to make decisions? How are we going to stakeholder, right? Like who owns which decisions? And that is something that people very seldom like sit down and actually ask.
Mhm.
But even in our tiny little not matrix company, we have very clear guidelines about who owns what decisions. And we'll try to reach collaboration, but at the end of the day, if it's a marketing decision, I make the call. If it's an operation systems issue, David makes the call. And we have agreed that we'll debate it, but then we're going to not waste time.
Yeah.
But in these matrix organizations, and we see a lot of them in global, it's so slow because we don't know who
Yeah.
owns the decision.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that is the biggest thing. And then also it's really a lot of how are we going to communicate? I was working with one global matrix organization and the executive said to me, Karin, there is only 1 hour of the day that my team can all be in a meeting at the same time
Mhm.
because we're so global.
Mm.
And he said, and even then, the guys in India have to be logging in after dinner at 9 o'clock. And that so you can't that's an unreasonable way. You can't expect you're going to have live interaction and have a lot of meetings. You're going to have to make a step back and say, okay, this is the reality. So how are we going to asynchronously communicate in a way that is fair to everyone? And then it's not always putting the burden on the people who are in the Philippines or somewhere place that is
Yeah.
further away from whoever you happen to be at the same time, because
Mhm.
that's
Mhm.
also what that you don't have my best interest at heart because you're making me do ridiculous gymnastics
Yeah.
just to do my job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is really difficult. So we talked a little bit about accountability and the magic that it creates. And we also know how challenging it is, especially right now as we're moving to such a lean organizations and very fast, right? Changing very quickly. And people don't take the time to hold others accountable in that moment. And you say I'm going to read this, when team members don't get along, one of the biggest culprits is lack of team accountability. What's the secret from your perspective?
Yeah, what we have really found is that the most high performing teams, it is not just the manager holding people accountable. And it is everyone feels empowered to have accountability conversations with one another, and they know how to do that in a productive way.
Hmm.
So we have our Inspire method for team accountability, which is an acronym that you can walk through. But it is really there's 3 components. First, I create a human connection with you, and hey, I really care about, and then you say what you're, so you've got a coworker, hey, I really care about you, if that's true. I
Yeah.
really care about this project. I really care about our outcomes. I really care about our shared customer, whatever it is that you really can genuinely from your heart say you care about. And
Yeah.
I've noticed that I haven't gotten the data that I need. I've noticed that when you send me these spreadsheets, they're full of formulas that don't work and the data is wrong. I've noticed that you have not been showing up to our Microsoft Teams meetings, and I'm curious. So you get clear on your intention for the conversation, and I am curious what's going on. Why do you think this keeps happening? And then you invite them to come up with a solution. What do you think you could do to make, or we can do to make sure that we have clean data all the time? And then you recap with a commitment, because a lot of times that is where things break down. We have a conflict conversation, we get a resolution, but we don't actually schedule time to talk about it again to see if it's going to work out. And now we got to all get the courage again to re-raise the conversation. And now we're angrier. But if you can actually schedule a time, great. So we've sounds like we've got a solution here. Let's talk about this maybe August 30th at 3:00. See how our solution is working. When teams can make that as a habit. And it's interesting because when we first started teaching the Inspire method, we really taught it as a management accountability technique. And years in, now we have been teaching it to everyone, and actually had one of our clients say, can you just print this up so I can give it to every single employee in the company so they just keep it on their desk so people can go, hey, let's have an accountability conversation. Let's just normalize this.
Yeah. Yeah. Take the fear out of it.
Yeah.
Just I love the term normalize it. And I think too, one of the secrets I've learned over the years is if I follow up with an email and just highlight some of the key decisions, I always get better results. So I always get more accountability. So I'm committed to this. This is what I heard you commit to,
Right.
etc. And
Yeah,
it just frames it for people. So before we open up the questions from other guests, I have one question. Is there one piece of advice that you can share with this audience if they are working with a dysfunctional team in conflict? Because that does happen.
Oh yeah. So I mean, I think the first thing with a dysfunctional, if you are working with a dysfunctional team, or if you are leading a dysfunctional team, the very first thing I would do is, I always say that you can only build a team one person at a time. And so can you talk to each person and build a human connection and get curious about that, how things are looking from their perspective? That is one of the most important things that you can do, whether because if you've taken over a dysfunctional team, right? The last thing you want to do is like, okay, well, I'm in charge now, and here are the new rules, right? Build the connection and show up curious about what is, because they may think that the way they're doing it is not dysfunctional. And so why do they do the things that they do? And then from there, set clear expectations. I know we've been working this way, and this is really hard sometimes when people will be leading a dysfunctional team, and then they'll come to our leadership training. They're like, oh, great. Now I know all what I should have been doing all along, but I've had this team for 3 years. Now, how do I go back and tell them it's, without it being really, really weird? And we say, don't make it a secret. Hey, I'm really working on being a better leader. I went to some leadership training and I learned some areas that we could be much more effective. And here's what how I want to operate from here on out. Here are the expectations. I realize I haven't set clear expectations, or I haven't been holding people accountable to these expectations. I get that. That's my fault. Here's what it's looking like starting today. And people will respect that, because here's the thing. Most people do not want to work on a dysfunctional team, right? It is exhausting, right? And so most of your folks will breathe a sigh of relief and say, oh, thank goodness, there is hope. Then things are going to get better.
And that vulnerability goes a whole long way in so many ways, right? Yeah. So I'm going to open it up. We don't have very many guests who are on camera, or Laura, if you could open up the view to all of the guests, I guess, who are on camera. I think that's about 4 of us, maybe, at this stage. And I'm going to invite everybody to, oh, we're just 2. Everyone else is off camera. Are there any questions? And you could put them in the chat. Aha, I recognize that smile. Yeah. Do you have a question this morning? Does anybody have a question? I know that Heather's online, and Deborah, Laura. No, not right now.
Hi there. I have a question. Oh, go
Okay.
ahead.
Go ahead.
Go on, Laura. You beat me to the chase.
Oh, sorry. It'll be really quick. Thank you. I appreciate it. Karin, oh, it's just so refreshing to hear your perspective. I have a sales and marketing background, so I'm used to working with sales teams. And at any rate, my question is, how do you identify unhealthy resistance? So someone that is not going to make the change that's going to result in this high performing team versus someone on the team that perhaps hasn't been coached well or had enough training, or like, is there a time frame from your perspective when you start to work with teams or within a certain culture that you're trying to shift? And I know those are very different circumstances. One's like a, the Titanic, and the other is much smaller and a little bit more control.
That's a really good and complex question, right? Which I could take from a lot of different angles. But the very first thing I would say is, have I tried, right? Like, have you actually tried to have the conversation? And then there's a couple of questions that I would ask around that. Have I tried? Not just have I told them that their behavior is not how it needs to be, but I would start with, have I tried a couple of things? Have I tried to connect at a human level with this person? Have I set clear expectations about what success looks like, as opposed to having magical thinking? And magical thinking looks like this. Well, they should know because and then you insert, have a master's degree, have 10 years of experience, get paid $200,000, whatever it is that you should know. Maybe they should know. I believe they should probably know. But if you have not set clear expectations, it is unfair to hold them accountable to those expectations. So if you created a human connection, have you set clear expectations? And then have you had the conversation? Have you pointed out the behavior that you are seeing as resistance? And in that way, the thing that I would go with, and I see this on sales teams. I led a 20 treasure person sales team when I was at Verizon. So I watched a lot of sales managers sometimes not have you need to get your results up. You need to make quota, right? This is not coaching, right? That is not, as you know, that's not habit-based coaching. So have you really broken it down into specific behaviors that will help them be successful? Have you made it that's all part of that clarity too. Have you made it really clear? And then I would shift to curiosity. Have you showed up really curious about what is getting in the way? And hey, I have noticed that you haven't made your quota for the last 3 quarters. And so let's talk about what it is your approach from all the way down to a habit level. Let's look at how you're planning your day. Let's look at how you're interacting with customers. Let's look at how you're planning for your strategic accounts. Whatever all of the behaviors that work for your organization. And are they doing those? And then if they're not doing those behaviors, or those behaviors aren't working, I'm curious, get really curious about why that's not working. And then move to commitment, then set a very clear action plan about what is expected with milestones and check-ins. When I say, have you tried? That sounds like trying to me. One of the things and I just, a lot of times people come into an organization and they'll be like, yeah, I got to get rid of the whole team. We got to start all over again. I hear this so frequently, and I'm thinking, like, have you tried? And have you given these humans the benefit of the doubt to do this? Because people will rise to an occasion. If you set a clear vision and you set clear expectations and you teach them how, and you train them on what expectations are, and you coach and support them and carry a good conversation with them, that will help most people. Not everybody. Some people will, are in the wrong role, or for one reason or another do not want to succeed. But most of the time, I think people give up too soon. But with that said, you also need to be setting a clear timeline, because you can't suffer with a dysfunctional team for a year either. You've got to be making solid progress and momentum.
Interesting. As I listen to some of those questions, I think even for the entrepreneurs who are on this call, those are all great questions that we need to stop and consider along the way, even with our subcontractors and others, right? Yeah. Are there any other questions? Just watching. I don't
Yeah, well,
see.
yeah, Karin, thank you so, so much for, sharing your thoughts. I chuckled when I heard, your phrase about silence being selfishness, yeah? And about, people being nice. And, I personally believe that it's unkind not to be candid.
Right.
It's really unkind because and it was from a personal experience where I didn't get honest feedback.
Mm.
And then at the end of the year, it was bonus time. And I was like, huh, what just happened? And so I had to actually have that conversation with my leader to say, this is not it. And I think that shocked my leader that anybody could confront him about getting feedback. Yeah. But I guess my question is, how do you, and I like the comment about trying, but how do you align expectations all the way, right? Because I've been in teams where, say at my level, I know what my expectations are. I do my best to be clear. And then those expectations seem to be overridden by someone above me. And so the team is getting mixed signals.
Yeah.
And so, it's almost like you're the sandwich filler, and you're like, okay, how can I help and who can help me type thing, how would you
Yeah. So
recommend
in our
such
leadership
things?
development program, we teach a concept called the most important thing. And we have a pyramid and we talk about 4 levels of clarity around the most important thing. So at the top of your organization, you have your strategic priorities, and you're only going to have like 3 of those, right? Maybe you probably have a revenue priority. You're going to have a human being priority. You may have a productivity or customer experience, depending on, but those are the big things that should guide everything. Then underneath that, you have your strategic initiatives. These are your long-term plans to accomplish those. Underneath that, you have your activities, the things that you are doing on a regular basis to make that happen. And then at the very bottom of the pyramid, you have habits. And we are all about habits around here. This is our synergy stack team collaboration system. And for each one of the 4 dimensions, we have really specific habits, and we get the teams to align on, go in and work with the team and say, which are the habits that are really going to get your team to the next level? What you're talking about is somewhere along the line, there is something that is not breaking down. And so there's a strategic initiative, but people they have habits that are destructive and not productive to make those happen. And so that's where you really need your systems and processes, and you need to be making sure that your leaders are communicating not just what needs to be happening, but how it needs to be happening, right? And seeing where those systems break down. And if there is a disconnect, then putting the fish on the table and talking about like why is this broken? It was interesting. What I think about as you can't read a book on conflict and not think about the most dysfunctional team that you've ever been on, right? And I think about the most dysfunctional team that I was ever on. And I was in charge of all the retail sales, so all the stores. And I had a peer, like a coworker who was my level, who was in charge of all the indirect stores. So other stores that were in direct competition to the corporate stores, and another direct coworker who was in charge of B2B sales. Well, all of that overlapped in some cases because we had businesses coming into our retail. It was such a mess. And we were in constant conflict with one another. And the thing is, we were all good human beings. But there was a structural that we were not set up to be success. We were set up to be in competition with one another. So the first thing that I would say is if things are really jangly and not, aligning, do you have a structure or systems issue that needs to be cleared up first before you focus on the interpersonal?
Boy, I don't
Thank
know
you.
about you, Ada, but I've lived that. I have lived that. Yeah, it's nasty. So thank you for that. And there's one more question in the chat before we wrap this up. It says, thank you so, it's from Heather. And it says, thank you so much for this session. So much resonates with me and how I try to support and coach the leaders I work with in my organization. I am wondering what you have experienced with this work in a multicultural business. We have situations where there is some language barriers between team members and between team members and their managers.
Yeah. So, multicultural, the first thing that I would say is in the World Workplace Conflict and Collaboration Survey, which was done in 46 countries, there was not a statistically significant difference between the type of conflicts, the advice people would give their former selves of dealing with conflict. It was so crazy consistent. Russia, Germany, United States, Ireland, places that I might have guessed, China, that I might have guessed would have a significant difference. It was just not even worth reporting the difference. So the first thing that I would say is we are all human and we all have very similar, we're afraid of having accountability conversations. We regret not speaking up sooner. It hurts our feelings when somebody who we've had a long relationship with betrays us, right? All of that happens across cultures. So I say that because yes, working in a multicultural business can be tricky. But if you can look to find the humanity and know that everyone deep in their heart is valuing many of the same similar things. Now, where it shows up differently is how we communicate. So, we do a lot of work in Southeast Asia. And one of the things that we find in Southeast Asia is people are it's much more hierarchical. There's a culture of respect. There's a culture of respect for your elders, even if you are a coworker, right? But somebody is your dad's age. There's all that stuff that you're thinking about. And so it's when we teach communication in those situations, we talk about how silence is selfish, right? Like if you really respected that person, now you're going to talk about it in a genuine way, but if you really respected that person, you're not going to let them continue to do a destructive behavior that is hurting them and the team, right? And so you have to kind of reframe that. But what you mentioned here specifically is language barriers. And I just was at a conference and I heard this story of this woman from Ghana, and she said somebody told her to go get the mum, like a mum, the flower, the mum, but the word mum to her meant go get the woman. And she went and she's like, no, there is no mum. And they're like, what are you talking about? There are 24 mums. Go get the mum. And she went back and forth, right? So if you feel like you're in a conflict, doesn't make sense to really stop and say, is there a language barrier here? What do words mean? And one of the most important things you can do here is what we teach is called the check for understanding, which is when you're in a conversation, you ask someone to do something or you summarize a meeting, you do not say, do you understand? Because if you say, do you understand? And they say yes, you actually know nothing more than what you said before you said, do you understand? But if you could say, what is your understanding about the first step we're going to take when we leave this meeting? And you hear it back from them. If there is a language barrier and it has been lost in translation, you know immediately before the conflict. And you can use a check for understanding up, down, sideways. You give me a project to do and I say, okay, just so to be clear, I think this project's going to take me about 20 hours. And Linda, you say 20 hours. Oh, no. I just want like directional. Can you go spend 10 minutes on this and give me your informed point of view? Right. Well, now I saved myself 19 hours and 50 minutes. Right. And so that those check for understandings, particularly in multicultural scenarios, can really be helpful.
Great question, Heather. Thank you for that. And did you get the answer you wanted? Are you still online? Yes, definitely. Never say, do you understand? I do remind managers to be sure to check for understanding.
Good.
For sure. Yeah. It is a great question because we all work in multicultural environments today. I mean, very few of us do not. And that's part of the gift. If we can tap into the
Yes.
wisdom from each of those, it's rich. So we're almost at the end of our call, and I have one question for you before I wrap it up, Karin, and that is, what's next for Karin and David? What's next on your agenda?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking that. Well, two things that we're most excited about. One is the Synergy Stack system that is a habit-based team collaboration system. We have been working tirelessly for the last 2 years to really beta test this and make a tool and a facilitator certification also that people can do. So to help to make it easier for teams to collaborate beyond just reading the book. And so that's out, and we're super happy about it. And we've been refining, and we haven't even really started advertising it, but we are next week. So that's what's next.
Good timing.
And the other thing is that we are doing a very exciting program called the Courageous Leadership Experience, and partnering with Talk About Multicultural in Denmark. And so we'll be working with 30 CEOs on a long-term cultural transformation. They'll all be from different industries. And it's a multi-month program. And I'm just so happy. I met this woman. I was speaking at an academic conference. And she is an academic, but also is really good at building conferences. And she said, let's do this thing. And her name is Karina, and I'm Karin. So it's Karin and Karina, and we're doing Denmark.
Oh, that's cool. That is exciting. All of it is exciting. You're obviously not standing still. As a woman in semi-retirement, there's a piece of me that wants to jump in and say, can I be part of that? And yet there's a piece of me that says, okay, slow it down then. Yeah, we'll just talk about it. I'll be checking in. Yeah,
Great.
I'll be watching your website. So I just want to say thank you for your wisdom, for your energy, for your time, for just being here today. And we will share this in whatever way we can. I'm getting lots of applause on the chat, and I can see Ada doing the nod, always with her smile. So we invite everyone on the call as well to check out our future conversation. Jeff Wetzler, author of Ask, is our next guest in September. And we will share the video and PowerPoint with everyone with all of the contact information. So we invite you to check out Karin and David and Let's Grow Leaders. There are many resources on that site. So take time to browse and definitely buy the book if you haven't already. We will be starting up our own leadership learning labs again this fall. And you can find more info on our website. This is not about us, it's about Karin today. So the information's in the PowerPoint. Just happy reading to everybody. Enjoy the rest of summer. And if you have questions, email Karin or email us and we'll find you the answers. So thanks for your participation. Thanks for the great questions. And the PowerPoint will head your way. So thank you, everybody. Take care. Yeah. Thanks, Karin.
Thank you. This was lots of fun. It was great to talk with you.
Thank you. Enjoy.
Thanks. Bye.